Okay, welcome to our panel on open banking. My name is Gianretto Porta. I'm one of the co-founders of Swiss Finance Startups, and I also co-founded Conto Vista, where I had a lot of touch points with this interesting topic of open banking. And with me today is Stephanie Auge-Dickhut. She's the head of CC Ecosystems of the Business Engineering Institute in St. Gallen. One of her research topics is ecosystems in the financial industry, and the Business Engineering Institute is also the initiative of the Open Banking Project.ch initiative. So we are very interested to see what Stephanie has to say about this topic. And also with us on the panel is Andreas Dietrich. He's a professor for banking at the Hochschule Luzern. He's also a board member of Luzerner Kantonalbank, and he's the author of the very well-known blog, Retail Banking blog, where he has also written extensively about topics regarding open banking. So welcome Stephanie and Andy, and let's dive into our topic of open banking. So my first question to you would be, in your opinion, what were the most interesting developments regarding open banking in the last 12 months in Switzerland? Andy, you're on the spotlight.
Okay. Well, I think there may be like three aspects that I might put a focus on. Like first is like there are many new initiatives in this area, or more development. Let's say Avaloq One, Vinovo Open Platform, the Finstar Open Banking, Swisscom Open Banking Hub, B-Link from 6. So you see that there are new initiatives in this area. So in the industry, actually, a lot of kind of players are currently taking care of the topic open banking, and also many banks realize that there's something coming called open banking, and they might consider it also from a strategic perspective. Then the second part is, I think this is one of the most important part that the banks already is the IT architecture. And I can see that in many banks that I know that the IT architecture kind of is changing a little bit, because banks try to adapt a little bit to the new reality, and also want to be ready if open banking is there, that they have the IT architecture also to do so, and to be faster and more innovative in this matter. So I can see that it changed something in the last year or last 2 years. And a third part is that you can also see first use case in Switzerland. Above all, the multi-banking solutions, for example, Valiant or UBS were launching their multi-banking solution in the past like 6 months. So you can see also from the use cases, from the client side, you can see kind of first open banking products in the Swiss market.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. What about you, Stephanie? What are the interesting developments on your side?
Yes, I think also the awareness and the understanding of open banking is increasing significantly. We have seen the first use cases, and I think there's interesting development in the market concerning the initiatives. As Andy mentioned, you have the initiatives that are company-driven, as B-Link by 6 and others, but you have also initiatives that are cross-companies. For example, the SFDI, which is concerning about defining interfaces, and the Open Banking Project, you mentioned it before. The Business Engineering Institute is here the coordinator, so let's say me two words to that. We are trying to make interfaces usable. We have a knowledge platform, an open sandbox, and the first product that was developed was a payment interface concerning also PSD2 aspects. And it is important, it was developed on an open source approach. And the next 2 steps we are looking for is the topic of bankable assets. This is driven by the St. Galler Kantonalbank and concerns the connections or the connection of external asset managers. And another topic is the topic of loans. That's a point that's driven by X and Ivy. One thing that has more acceptance now in the market is the desire for a uniform definition of individual interfaces and the development on a basis of an open source approach. This is also supported by the regulator, the State Secretary of International Finance. And another point that is not so far developed now is the understanding of the possibilities of open banking. If you're looking at open banking in the sense of PSD2, this means to transfer the data sovereignty back to the customer. And it won't end at the boundaries of the financial industry. It's a possibility to build cross-industry services or business models.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you both mentioned all these initiatives that we have in Switzerland. Like two criticisms that I hear a lot regarding the initiatives are that there are a lot of them and they don't work together as well as they should to really enable one standard in Switzerland. And the other one is that they are really bank and company driven and not that like end user driven as if we compare it to the legislation of PSD2, that there this like data belongs to the user thing was more of a driver. What would you say to those criticisms?
Well, actually, I personally agree with both of them. It reminds me a little bit to the situation with Twint and Paymit and so on. Like there are too many initiatives at the moment, in my opinion. Of course, everybody wants to have their main ecosystem and wants to be their platform, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense at the end if we have in our small country like 3 or 4 different kind of standards. So I just hope that they find together, like Twint did find together, and that the standardization is getting faster. Because as long as we have these different initiatives, I think it's everything will be much slower than if you have one initiative that has one standard, they're setting one standard.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's also a dilemma for the companies because you have 2 ways you could go. You can develop your own self-defined interfaces and earn money in the short way, but on the expense of the other network partners. But it's a problem if you don't have an accepted standard. You have to choose what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So to summarize, we did quite a lot of progress. We see new initiatives. Like that's a good sign. That's a sign that the topic is on the radar. But we still have some challenges ahead regarding open banking. Now, my next question would be: do you think that this whole COVID pandemic helps in the long term, helps our open banking efforts here in Switzerland, or do you think it could hurt them?
If you look at the pandemic, it's a driver of digitalization, and so far it also helps the open banking movement. But the main driver of open banking is a regulator, not a coronavirus.
Also in Switzerland, you would say?
Yes.
We have I agree. Sorry, go on. Like what I just see is like there's a little bit slowdown of some projects during the Corona crisis. So also, if you look at B-Link or other projects, multi-banking projects, banks had some other issues in the last month, so that they kind of say, well, open banking is still relevant, but first we have to do other things first. And so it was more like, at least in the short term, it was more like a slowdown of some initiatives that I know. But in the long run, I agree with Stephanie. I don't think it's like it's not the main driver of open bank. It's not the coronavirus, but it's about the regulator and not the mindset of banking of the banks. And I don't think that is like an accelerator or something like that for the whole kind of open banking idea.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, for us as Swiss finance startups, this open banking topic is really interesting, also because it's also a topic regarding our capability to innovate here in the financial center of Switzerland, and if we have such topics, it's also important not just to look at the progress here, but also to compare it with what other countries around us do. So my next question would be, if you compare the developments in Switzerland with what happens in Europe, in the other countries, in the topic of open banking, like what is your feeling there? Are we, because like I think we can say the first mover where other countries with this PSD2 standard, and I would say we moved a bit later, and we also decided to do it in a bit another way here in Switzerland. Do you think that now we see that this is a good way to progress, or do you think that the other countries will still have like an advantage on Switzerland if we're talking on open banking?
Well, I think that there are different countries in the world, right? So in some countries, they're at about the same level as Switzerland is. And you have the EU with PSD2. So this PSD2 requires banking in the EU, and the EU is since 2019 to grant third-party service providers to have access to bank accounts. So that kind of helps to kind of push the whole thing. However, because of the PSD2 regulations kind of left the market with the exact technical design of the API, they use also several standards. Of course, there's the Berlin standard, but there are several standards. And so I think also if you look at the EU, for example, Germany in some project, the PSD2 didn't really help that they kind of can faster innovate. I think for me personally, I'm not sure what you think, but for me the best country is the UK, because in the UK, because of the threat of Brexit, and they want to secure kind of their pole position in the open banking, kind of the major banks in the UK have a kind of joined forces, and they define a common standard. It's called the open banking standard. And the UK has thus kind of succeeded in implementing a uniform standard with all kind of bigger banks. And that's, in my opinion, why they are at the moment at a completely different level than Switzerland is, and a little bit further away also from what we know from Europe. So I think it's both its regulation, but also kind of the mindset of a country that helps these countries to go on. And Switzerland at the moment has chosen another way. It can also be, at the end of the day, can be also a good way. However, as mentioned before, I think you need to have a standardized one standard in the country that to kind of go on from that. As long as I wouldn't say like do you need a regulation for that, but if the kind of the banks and kind of the ecosystem decides this is the standard and goes on from there, everything will be fine. So I think this is more important that we kind of focus on that, and I wouldn't say that we have the better or the worst way that we could choose, but it's more about this kind of stuff that we have to figure out.
I agree with Andy. Yes, I agree with Andy. If you look at the UK or Singapore, you have much more involvement of the regulator. The open banking principles are mainly developed or more developed than here. But on the other hand, there is a rejection of too much regulation from the banks if it happens. If you look at Germany, there are a lot of PSD2 projects, but the provider get only information or data on a minimal basis. So the banks try to lower it down what goes out on information. And for example, if you look at the Deutsche Bank, she has 4 PSD2 interfaces. So I think the way should be that there is a cross-company initiative from all the main banks to develop a standard. We need it, like Andy said it, to get further on, but not only on the pressure of the regulator, but on the initiative on an open banking source with the main companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds absolutely reasonable. Then the question would be, why aren't we able to get the banks together and create such a standard? And like one thing I always see is that there are particular interests of different banks, and the question is how can we lose this deadlock? Who could take the role of like pushing the banks to come together and do something that at the end I think would be good for the financial center Switzerland, and at the end also for all the banks?
I think I'm the wrong person because I'm involved in the open banking projects. Yeah, I see this as a possibility, but also in connection also with the other initiatives, for example, the SFDI. I think there are also talks about this, and I hope this goes in the right direction to make a uniform approach.
Andy, would you?
I think just some banks are just afraid of that. I mean, some banks just still didn't realize what open banking means. For them, it's like a complicated IT project, and they don't consider it from the strategic perspective. I think that's one side. On the other side, I mean, of course, the big banks have a lot of money and they can do something like that. They have the power also to build a kind of a nice interface, and they see some use case and so on. But there are a lot of smaller banks in Switzerland that cost a lot of money to do something like that. They're not ready for that. They're afraid that they're losing the customer interface if they're going open. So I think there are also some banks are just afraid of this new kind of possibilities. They don't see the chances, that they see, see more the threats of this kind of open banking project. So that's why some are kind of very defensive in this area.
That's a perfect segue to my next question, because I wanted to ask you what some really good open banking use case are that you saw in the last month. So because I think there it's also a lot about education to show banks and stakeholders of this open banking that there are interesting use cases that involve open banking, and that's why I wanted to ask you guys what are some interesting use cases that you saw in the last 12 months.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of kind of options that you have with open banking. I mean, it also helps you to kind of be faster to kind of implement some new products from other kind of startups. So that's one case, of course. But like a real kind of open banking case that I personally like, and I think you like it too, John, is the multi-banking case. This is just something that is very interesting from the client side, but also from a bank side, probably. And it was interesting to see when I was in the UK, like in February this year, because they're kind of one step ahead again in the multi-banking. And in Switzerland, first banks start to implement multi-banking and say, well, cool, our customers can see kind of 3 different bank accounts and with our e-banking. And in the UK, they say, well, that's cool, but the real cool thing is afterwards the analytics and what we can offer the customers, because we see this and this and this and this. So you can see there's a big potential not only to show the customers some additional information about different accounts, but really to go on and see how you can better help your customers and have more data. And you also have a better overview of the liquidity management, because if you have a liquidity management just from one bank account, but you have 3 bank accounts, it just doesn't really make too much sense. So there are a lot of options that you can additionally add with like a tool like a multi-banking.
Maybe because I was involved in that project, I can just add, and maybe that shows also a bit the challenges we have here in Switzerland. I mean, we have lots of initiatives in this area of open banking, but to implement this multi-banking solution that Contovista did together with Valiant, we had to use eBIX, a very, very old protocol. So that also shows we have a lot of initiatives, but if as a startup or as a company you want to really do something, there are a lot of things are in work, but it's not yet that mature that you could go and implement these use cases. And I think that's one area where we need to make some progress to have less slides and more things that are really working and that people can use and innovate.
Let's look at it from the other side. We have all these good multi-banking approaches, but on the other hand, what's the killer criterion for the development of open banking? If you take the position of the user or the customer, maybe a corporate, and you have a multi-banking relationship, and every bank has self-developed non-standardized interfaces, you can't offer a great customer experience. And this is the point we have to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you see some progress there, or can you say something about what you are doing in the open banking project to address this?
We are developing this kind of interfaces, and not developing, we are making them usable in a public or in an open source approach. So we have we have certain banks that are now part of the initiative, and we have also projects concerning the payment besides the retailers and the banks, and the development is closely from the needs of the customer. So we hope we will grow much more, and also I think it could be a great opportunity to cooperate with the different initiatives to make one whole initiative and not to have too many movements in the market.
Yeah, perfect. My last question to you both, like what would you like to see in the next 12 months in Switzerland regarding open banking? Andy.
Standardization of interfaces, APIs, so one standard. I think this is something that will help everyone to go on and to kind of really push this open banking project.
Perfect. Let's write that down, Stephanie.
Yes, I agree with Andy. I think the main point is to have this standardization, but developed on a public source approach, so everybody can engage and we find a common interpretation of the needs of the customers and the banks.
Perfect. That's a great point to end our session. Stephanie, Andy, thank you very much for your inputs. This was great, and hope to do this next year in person. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.